A single line on a map could once start a war. Many of the stunning medieval maps you have seen were not honest guides, but weapons of information warfare. Their borders deliberately filled with secret codes to mislead rival kingdoms. This video will reveal the 27 ingenious methods mapmakers used to embed these deceptions, transforming beautiful parchment into tools of espionage. You will discover how cartographers hid entire mountain passes with a stroke of ink and used sea monsters to mark secret naval routes. By the end, you will see the familiar world of old maps in a completely new and startling light, understanding the hidden battles fought over parchment and perception. How much of what we think we know about the past was shaped by these deliberate lies? That solitary monk, hunched over his parchment, was not just an artist but a keeper of secrets. His workbench was a command center for information warfare, where a single quill stroke could redirect an army or bankrupt a rival merchant guild. Historians like J. B. Harley described these cartographers as agents of power, a title that captures their true role perfectly. They were scholars, yes, but also spies, entrusted by kings and bishops to create documents that served two masters. The first was public knowledge, providing a usable guide for travelers and traders. The second, and far more secret, was the state. Their key responsibility was to consult directly with rulers, weaving covert political agendas directly into the geography. They would take intelligence from explorers, diplomats, and even captured spies, then translate that raw information into a coded visual language. A wide, menacing river might be drawn with exaggerated cliffs to suggest it was impassable, protecting a vulnerable ford used by their own troops. A wealthy rival city could be depicted as a small, impoverished village, making it seem like an unworthy target for conquest. The mapmaker's greatest challenge was balancing truth and lie so seamlessly that no one would ever suspect the deception. How do you hide a mountain in plain sight? The answer lies in the coded systems they invented, a secret language of symbols we are just beginning to understand. A single mountain range could be made to look like an impenetrable wall. This was the first and most direct method of cartographic deception, the deliberate distortion of geographical features. Medieval mapmakers possessed a deep understanding of the land, and they used that knowledge not just to represent it, but to reinvent it for a strategic purpose. A narrow, traversable pass through the Alps might be drawn as a sheer, unbroken cliff face on a map destined for a rival court. A wide, calm river that was easy to ford could be depicted with raging whirlpools and jagged rocks, suggesting certain death for any army attempting a crossing. The goal was psychological warfare, using ink and parchment to build false barriers in the minds of enemy commanders. Historical records, including notes on the famous Hereford Mappa Mundi, reveal how cartographers would dramatically inflate the size of deserts or the width of oceans. These exaggerated empty spaces on the map implied a journey was far more dangerous and supplies far more scarce than they truly were, effectively steering travelers and armies away from sensitive areas. The deception required a master's touch. A mapmaker could not simply invent geography from nothing, or the entire document would be dismissed as a fantasy. Instead, they expertly blended fact with fiction. They might take a real, somewhat rugged mountain and exaggerate its peaks and canyons just enough to make it appear unconquerable. A fertile valley vital to a kingdom's food supply might be shrunk and depicted with sparse, sickly trees, making the land seem barren and worthless to any potential invader. What other natural elements became pawns in this cartographic chess game? Dense forests could be drawn teeming with mythical beasts, and calm coastal waters might be filled with sea monsters, all to control the flow of people, goods, and armies. This clever manipulation of the land itself set the stage for an even more subtle layer of coding, one that used symbols instead of scale. The sea monsters you see coiled in the ocean margins were rarely just decoration. They were carefully placed warnings, a second method of cartographic coding that used fear itself as a boundary. Mapmakers populated coastlines and uncharted territories with dragons, griffins, and leviathans, not merely to fill empty space, but to encode very real dangers or opportunities. A dragon illustrated near a mountain pass might not signify a mythical beast, but instead a heavily fortified garrison waiting in ambush. Conversely, a more benevolent creature, like a gentle seahorse in a calm bay, could secretly mark a safe harbor used for clandestine trade with an ally. This was a sophisticated visual language where every monster was a symbol with a specific, covert meaning. Scholars like Chet Van Duzer point to maps like the Carta Marina, where terrifying sea monsters clustered densely around certain sea lanes. To a rival navy, these illustrated horrors suggested treacherous waters and certain doom, subtly directing their ships away from the very routes the mapmaker's kingdom wished to keep secret for its own use. This practice transformed the map into a psychological deterrent, using artistic embellishment to communicate a clear message: stay out. The fear of the unknown was weaponized, making imagination a powerful tool for controlling real-world movement. But these mythical codes were not static. As political alliances shifted and new enemies emerged, the bestiary of deception evolved. A dragon that once warned of a military outpost might later be redrawn as a griffin to signify a new trade embargo. The legends on the map were as fluid as the borders they protected, constantly adapting to suit the needs of the moment. This clever use of folklore paved the way for an even more precise form of coding, one that relied not on monsters, but on meticulously crafted text. Those ornate borders, filled with twisting vines and gilded patterns, were far more than simple decoration. They were the third method of cartographic deception, a clandestine canvas where hidden symbols communicated vital secrets to those who held the key. While a rival spy might study the map's main geography, the true intelligence was often hidden in plain sight, woven into the intricate artwork framing the parchment. A repeated fleur-de-lis, a common heraldic symbol, could be subtly altered. One extra petal on a single flower might indicate a royal fortress just beyond the hills, its location confirmed only to allies familiar with the code. A complex knot in a Celtic-style border, if one strand appeared deliberately broken, could mark a mountain pass where patrols were infrequent, signaling a vulnerable point in the kingdom's defenses. These were not random artistic choices. They were a visual cipher as deliberate as a coded message. Experts studying maps like the Salter World Map have noted specific geometric patterns where the number of interlocking circles corresponds to the days of travel to a fresh water source. A border filled with lush, fruitful vines might encircle a region known for its abundant grain stores, while a section depicting thorny brambles could warn of a barren or hostile territory. The system relied on a shared, pre-arranged key. A court official receiving the map would know, for instance, that every oak leaf represented a unit of cavalry stationed 10 miles from a marked town. This allowed for discrete updates on troop strength and positions without ever writing a single incriminating word on the map itself. The beauty of the border was its perfect disguise. To any uninformed observer, it was merely evidence of the mapmaker's skill and the patron's wealth. But to the intended viewer, it was a detailed report on military logistics and resource management, a silent conversation happening in the margins. This sophisticated use of symbolic art demonstrated a need for even more precise and measurable secrets, paving the way for codes that relied not on pictures but on numbers. The vibrancy of a single color could whisper a kingdom's deepest secrets. This was the fourth method of cartographic deception, the strategic use of color coding for secret messages. While the untrained eye saw only beautiful landscapes, a ruler or trusted general saw a dynamic intelligence report painted in pigments. A lush forest illustrated not with a single shade of green, but with a subtle gradient from light to dark, might precisely indicate the density of troops stationed within its shadowy borders. A river depicted in a deep, rich blue could secretly signal that its waters were deep enough for supply ships, while a pale, almost translucent wash of the same color warned of treacherous shallows, perfect for an enemy ambush. Historical analysis of masterpieces like the Catalan Atlas reveals how gold leaf and vibrant reds were often lavished on prosperous, well-known regions. This was a deliberate act of misdirection, drawing a rival's greedy eye toward obvious wealth and away from the true strategic assets, like a hidden mountain fortress or a secluded shipyard, which were left in muted, unremarkable earth tones. This entire system operated on a secret lexicon of color, a code known only to the mapmaker and his royal patron. By manipulating these pigments, a cartographer could completely reshape a viewer's perception without altering a single geographical line. A valley rich in iron ore could be painted a sickly brown to suggest barren soil, while a militarily vulnerable coastal plain might be rendered inviting, fertile greens to lure an invading force into a trap. The codes were not universal, they adapted to different cultural contexts. In one kingdom, purple might signify a royal hunting ground, while in another, it marked the location of a secret diplomatic meeting place. This sophisticated manipulation of visual perception demonstrates just how deeply mapmakers understood the human mind, using the most fundamental element of art, color, to guide and mislead. It also laid the groundwork for an even more precise and mathematical form of deception, one that manipulated the very scale of the world. The written word on a map carried an authority that ink and color alone could not. This was the fifth method of cartographic deception, the strategic use of misleading inscriptions and text placement. A label declaring barren lands might be carefully lettered over a lush, fertile valley, a deliberate lie to protect a kingdom's agricultural heartland from the envious eyes of a rival. These textual deceptions were crafted with the precision of a state secret, using place names, descriptions, and annotations to spread false intelligence about everything from local resources to population strength. A bustling, fortified city could be labeled as a mere small village or a hamlet, downplaying its military and economic significance to any foreign agent studying the document. Scholars like David Woodward have highlighted how mapmakers even used archaic or deliberately obscure language to describe borders, ensuring that only those with local knowledge could decipher the true meaning. But the deception went beyond the words themselves, extending to their very placement on the parchment. A long, flowing name could be stretched artistically across a narrow mountain pass, making the treacherous route appear on the map as a broad, inviting valley. Conversely, a critical annotation about a safe ford in a river might be tucked into a crowded corner or written in a minuscule script, easily overlooked by a scanning eye. This method preyed on a fundamental trust in the written word. A rival court presented with a beautifully rendered map was far more likely to believe a textual claim of impassable swamps than to question the cartographer's illustrated rivers and forests. The mapmaker's quill, therefore, became a tool of linguistic warfare. They might invent entirely new place names that sounded ominous or impoverished, or use subtle phrasing to suggest a region was plagued by bandits when it was in fact perfectly secure. This manipulation of language transformed the map's legend into a minefield of half-truths and outright fabrications, where every word was a potential border guard in disguise. It reveals a world where trust was the ultimate commodity, and the most dangerous lies were those written in plain sight. Sometimes the most powerful secrets on a map were the ones that were not there at all. A coastal kingdom could be depicted with a smooth, unbroken shoreline, its cartographic silence hiding a deep, sheltered bay used for covert naval maneuvers. This sixth method, the strategic omission of key landmarks, was a form of deception through absence. Map makers, in consultation with their royal patrons, would deliberately erase entire roads, settlements, and natural features from the parchment to protect vital strategic assets. By not drawing a crucial mountain pass, they could funnel enemy armies into a pre-planned killing field. By leaving a reliable freshwater spring off the map, they could control the only lifeline for travelers in a vast desert, ensuring that only those with local knowledge could survive the journey. Historical records from the Byzantine Empire show maps that completely omitted newly built fortifications along a contested border. To an invading force studying such a document, the territory appeared undefended and ripe for conquest, luring them directly into a carefully laid trap. This approach required a cartographer to possess a deep, intimate understanding of the land, not just to record it, but to know precisely which piece of information was most valuable to suppress. How did they decide what to erase without rendering the map useless for their own people? The answer lay in a delicate balance. A map intended for internal use by merchants and officials might include these missing details in a separate, highly guarded key. For trusted allies, the very absence of a landmark was a silent signal, a hint that they should seek further verbal guidance. For rivals, however, these deliberate gaps created dangerous blind spots in their intelligence, leaving them navigating a half-true world where a missing line could mean the difference between a victory and a devastating ambush. The empty spaces on the map were not voids of ignorance but active instruments of control. A ruler's own units of measurement could become a secret weapon. This seventh method of cartographic deception involved encoding numbers and measurements to create a hidden layer of misinformation. While the lines and colors shaped a rival's perception, the scale bar and coordinates dictated their logistics, and here the mapmaker's precision became a perfect vehicle for lies. Envision a beautifully drawn scale bar at the corner of a map, clearly marked in leagues. To any foreign spy, it appeared to be a standard tool for calculating distance. In reality, the mapmaker had secretly defined that league as being much longer or shorter than the accepted norm. An army relying on this map would disastrously miscalculate its marches, arriving exhausted at a river crossing days behind schedule or running out of supplies long before reaching their destination. This was not a crude forgery but a sophisticated manipulation of the most trusted element of any map, its mathematical foundation. Medieval geographers like Al-Idrisi wrote of systems where the numbers themselves held coded messages. The intricate patterns in a map's border might not just be decorative knots, they could represent a Fibonacci sequence. To an uninitiated observer, it was mere artistry. But to an Allied commander, counting the sequence revealed the number of days until a planned naval attack or the coordinates for a secret rally point deep in enemy territory. The map became a clock and a calendar, its silent numbers ticking down to a moment of military action. What numerical systems were most commonly manipulated? Travel times were a primary target. A journey of 5 days could be stretched to 7 on the map simply by altering the scale, forcing an enemy to carry extra provisions and slow their advance. Territorial size was another. A small, vulnerable duchy could be made to look vast and formidable on parchment, discouraging aggression through a cartographic illusion. This arithmetic trickery represents one of the earliest forms of data control, proving that whoever defines the units holds the power to reshape reality itself. It was a cold, calculated game that shifted deception from the realm of art into the domain of mathematics, setting the stage for an even more personal and insidious form of cartographic espionage. A perfectly drawn compass rose could steer an entire fleet toward ruin. This eighth method of cartographic deception involved the deliberate manipulation of compass roses and orientation, turning the very tool meant to provide direction into a source of calculated misdirection. Mapmakers understood that a user's trust in north, south, east, and west was absolute, and they learned to subtly exploit that faith. By tilting the entire map just a few degrees off true north, they could make a safe, deep water channel appear to lie in a direction that actually led to a jagged reef. A secret port used for resupplying friendly ships might be placed on the parchment due west of a headland, when in reality it lay safely to the southwest, hidden from any rival captain strictly following the map's skewed grid. This was not a crude act of falsification, but a sophisticated blend of science and subterfuge. As experts like Evelyn Edson have observed, skilled cartographers used their knowledge of magnetic variations, the natural difference between magnetic north and true north, to create deceptions that were incredibly difficult to detect. A local sailor from the mapmaker's own kingdom would know to adjust his compass for the local deviation, following the true path hidden within the distorted chart. A foreign navigator, however, trusting the beautifully illustrated compass rose before him, would sail confidently into a dead end or a treacherous current. Portland charts, renowned for their accurate coastlines, sometimes contained this very type of encoded directional lie, making them priceless to their owners and perilous to their enemies. The deception required impeccable precision. A map tilted too obviously would be dismissed as the work of an amateur, but a slight, almost imperceptible skew could have devastating consequences over a long voyage. An eastern border might be rotated on the parchment to seem like a direct and easy march, hiding the fact that the actual approach was defended by a series of steep, impassable gorges. How did these directional codes evolve? As compass technology improved and understanding of magnetism grew, the methods of encoding became even more refined. Mapmakers began creating dual-layer systems, where the decorative wind lines radiating from the compass rose held the true directions for allies, while the prominent cardinal points subtly misled everyone else. This twisting of orientation proves that the most dangerous lies are not those that hide information, but those that corrupt the fundamental framework we use to understand the world. It was a reminder that on these parchment battlefields, even north could not be trusted. A phantom city could appear on a map, fully named and walled, yet it never cast a single shadow on the earth. This ninth method of cartographic deception involved the deliberate inclusion of fictional settlements and borders, creating a landscape of strategic ghosts. Mapmakers, acting on orders from their royal patrons, would invent entire towns, road networks, and even political boundaries to serve as decoys. Their purpose was to confuse invading armies and complicate the reconnaissance efforts of rival kingdoms. During the long and bitter conflicts of the 100 Years' War, for example, maps circulated that showed formidable stone fortresses along a contested river valley. To an enemy general studying the parchment, the region appeared heavily fortified and dangerous to approach. In reality, those castles were pure invention, their imposing towers existing only in ink, designed to intimidate and redirect an army toward a more defensible choke point chosen by the mapmaker's king. The creation of these fictions required immense creativity and a deep understanding of geopolitics. A fabricated town needed a plausible name drawn from the local language, and it had to be placed in a location that made geographical sense, near a river confluence or a forest edge, or it would be immediately dismissed as a childish error. The most effective lies were those that perfectly mimicked the truth. A phantom border, carefully drawn through a disputed territory, could legitimize a kingdom's expansionist claims during diplomatic negotiations, presenting a fait accompli on parchment long before any soldiers marched. What motivated the creation of these cartographic mirages? The reasons were as varied as the deceptions themselves. Sometimes, a fictional settlement was placed to draw raiders away from a real, vulnerable village. Other times, a network of invented roads could suggest a region was densely populated and well-patrolled, discouraging infiltration. By populating their maps with these strategic ghosts, cartographers manipulated the very perception of density and control. They could make a sparsely inhabited frontier appear like a bustling, well-defended heartland, or they could make a wealthy trading hub seem like a lonely, isolated outpost. This art of invention underscores the profound blend of imagination and cold strategy that defined medieval mapmaking, where the power to create a place was just as potent as the power to conquer one. A golden lion emblazoned on a shield could secretly warn of 1,000 enemy troops. The 10th method of cartographic deception transformed the noble art of heraldry into a precise code for military intelligence. Those elaborate coats of arms and family crests dotting the borders of kingdoms were far more than decorative boasts of lineage. To a rival lord, they were simply displays of pride. But to a trusted ally, they were a dynamic report on troop strength, fortress integrity, and political loyalty, all communicated through a silent language of symbols and colors. Mapmakers worked with royal heralds to design these emblems, embedding specific meanings into their every detail. The system relied on a prearranged key known only to a select few. The tincture or background color of a shield might indicate the number of soldiers garrisoned in a nearby castle. A field of vibrant red could signify a full complement of 500 men, while a pale yellow might reveal a skeleton crew of just 50, a glaring vulnerability. The charges, the symbols placed upon the shield, conveyed even more nuanced information. A lion rampant, a symbol of raw courage, often marked a formidable stronghold with high walls and ample supplies. An eagle with its wings spread could denote a key diplomatic ally, suggesting that crossing this border would provoke a war on two fronts. Conversely, a symbol like a broken crown or a shattered sword, subtly integrated into the design, was a grave warning. It signaled internal rebellion, a duke whose loyalty was wavering, or a fortress whose defenses had been recently compromised. Scholars analyzing armorial maps from the complex patchwork of the Holy Roman Empire have found consistent patterns where these heraldic codes correspond perfectly with historical troop movements and diplomatic dispatches. How could such a symbolic language remain consistent across different cultures and realms? The answer lies in its very flexibility. While the core concept was universal, the specific meanings of a boar or a fleur-de-lis were negotiated secretly between kingdoms. A map intended for a French ally would use a different heraldic cipher than one made for a Venetian spy, ensuring that even if one code was broken, the entire system was not compromised. This practice elevated the map from a static document to a living instrument of statecraft, where a single emblem could update a king on the shifting loyalties of his border lords without a single risky letter ever being sent. Personal symbols of power had become the most discreet border guards of all. The legend of a map was its very soul, the key that promised to unlock its secrets. But some of these guides were written in a forked tongue, offering one truth to the public and a deeper, hidden reality to a select few. This 11th method of cartographic deception involved embedding complex ciphers directly within the map's legend and key. On the surface, the chart symbols appeared standard and functional. A small drawing of a tree meant a forest, a tower indicated a settlement. Yet for those who held the royal cipher, that very same tree icon could secretly mark the location of a newly discovered silver vein, while the tower might point not to a real city, but to a phantom fortress designed to misdirect an invading army. The Go map of Britain, for instance, contains a seemingly straightforward key, but scholars have long debated odd inconsistencies in its symbols, where certain markings appear to correspond not to geographical features, but to historical events or resource deposits recorded in royal ledgers, suggesting a second, parallel language operating just beneath the surface of the parchment. How did a cartographer build such a dual-purpose system? The most effective technique was the subtle alteration of a standard form. A castle symbol drawn with 4 turrets might be the public code for a fortified town, but the same castle drawn with a 5th, almost invisible turret could be the secret signal for a vulnerable border outpost in need of reinforcements. The legend itself became a codebook, its simplicity a perfect disguise for a web of strategic lies. This corruption of the key was the ultimate act of cartographic control. By manipulating the glossary, the mapmaker held the power to dictate exactly how the entire document was to be read and understood. A rival, trusting the public key, would see a landscape of impenetrable forests and mighty castles. An ally, using the secret cipher, would see the same map and perceive a network of mine shafts, poorly defended passes, and decoy strongholds. In this sophisticated game, clarity itself became the most potent tool for deceit, proving that the greatest secrets were not hidden in the margins, but in the one place everyone was told to look for the truth. A kingdom's most vulnerable border could be made to appear 10 times its actual size. This 12th method, the distortion of scale in specific regions, allowed mapmakers to surgically alter perception, making narrow valleys seem like vast, unconquerable chasms and short marches look like epic, supply-draining journeys. They did not change the entire map, which would have been immediately suspicious. Instead, they carefully manipulated proportions only in the areas that mattered most, warping geography with the precision of a master strategist. A narrow mountain pass, the only easy route into a wealthy duchy, might be drawn on an exaggerated scale, its cliffs towering and its distances stretched. To an invading general studying the parchment, this pass appeared as a long, treacherous slog, a perfect place for an ambush, thus deterring him from even attempting the route. Conversely, a kingdom's own main supply road could be compressed on the same map, making the journey between 2 friendly fortresses look swift and simple, encouraging its use while hiding its true length from prying eyes. This selective scaling was a weapon of psychological geography. As experts like Catherine Delano Smith have observed, Portolan charts often employed this very technique. A dangerous, reef-strewn coastline might be drawn with an enlarged scale, forcing navigators to believe they had many more leagues of hazardous water to traverse than they actually did. This cleverly encouraged them to steer far out to sea, away from the mapmaker's own secret, sheltered coves and inlets. How did these artists maintain overall consistency while introducing such deliberate errors? The answer lies in a brilliant calibration of art and science. A mapmaker might use a standard scale for the center of the map, where cities and trade routes were well known, and then gradually shift to a different, secret scale for the contested borderlands. The transition was often hidden within a dense forest, a range of hills, or the intricate decorations of a compass rose, making the change feel like a natural variation or an artistic choice rather than a calculated deception. This manipulation highlights the fine line medieval cartographers walked every day, balancing the credible representation of the world with the secret imperative to defend it. They proved that a map's truth was not a single measurement, but a fluid concept that could be stretched and shrunk to serve the crown. The stars themselves were co-conspirators in this grand deception. Medieval mapmakers frequently wove astrological and astronomical symbols into their parchment borders, creating a celestial code for timing military campaigns and managing resources. This 13th method transformed the predictable cycles of the heavens into a secret calendar for earthly power. A map might be framed by the 12 signs of the zodiac, but these were not mere decoration. The position of Aries the ram near a particular river crossing could secretly indicate that the ford was shallow and safe for an army to cross only during the early spring, when the mountain snows had not yet melted. Conversely, the constellation of Scorpio hovering over a coastal fortress might warn that the garrison was most vulnerable in the late autumn, when storms made naval reinforcements impossible and the troops were distracted by the harvest. This practice reflected a deep belief that human affairs were intrinsically tied to the cosmos, a belief that cartographers weaponized for the state. Scholars like Stephen McCluskey point to masterworks like the Ebstorf map, where the entire known world is depicted within the body of Christ, surrounded by celestial spheres. Within this sacred cosmology, the precise alignment of certain stars with specific cities or borders was almost certainly a coded message about auspicious dates for diplomatic envoys to travel or for taxes to be collected from a remote province. The system provided a layer of meaning that was entirely invisible to anyone not trained in both cartography and astrology. A rival spymaster might see a beautiful illustration of the moon phase near a mountain range, but only a trusted ally would know that the waning crescent signaled that the mountain passes would be lightly guarded for the next 7 nights, perfect for moving troops in secret. This celestial coding introduced a crucial temporal dimension to border deception. It was no longer just about where things were, but about when they were most accessible or most defenseless. The map became a dynamic instrument, its meaning shifting with the seasons and the stars, ensuring that a kingdom's strategies remained as fluid and unpredictable as the heavens themselves. How did these astrological deceptions pave the way for even more personalized forms of cartographic espionage? The answer lies not in the stars, but in the unique handwriting of the mapmakers themselves. A caravan master would trust his map with his life and his fortune, only to find the promised road ending in a desolate canyon. This 14th method, the creation of false trade routes and pathways, weaponized the very hope of commerce itself. Mapmakers, understanding that wealth flowed along lines of ink, learned to draw mirages of prosperity that led only to ruin. They charted fictional roads that snaked invitingly across the parchment, complete with carefully marked river fords, mountain passes, and even symbols for inns and watering holes that were pure invention. The goal was twofold: to divert rival merchants from genuinely profitable routes, thus preserving local monopolies, and to lure hostile caravans or even small armies into pre-arranged ambush sites where the geography itself became a trap. Historical accounts from the height of the Silk Road describe how competing city-states would produce and circulate maps featuring such decoy routes. A map might show a shorter, easier path to a wealthy trading hub, a path that, in reality, dissolved into trackless desert or a narrow box canyon where bandits or soldiers waited. These deceptions were crafted with a merchant's eye for detail, making them dangerously believable. The false road would branch off from a known, legitimate route at a plausible point. It would be drawn to navigate around real geographical obstacles, demonstrating a superficial logic that encouraged trust. What factors decided where to place these cartographic traps? The most common targets were regions rich in strategic resources, like a newly discovered silver mine or a forest of rare sandalwood. By inventing a more attractive, yet entirely fictional, route to a different location, mapmakers could draw attention and traffic away from the real prize. They could also use these false pathways to protect fragile alliances. A trade road that passed through the territory of a friendly but weak kingdom might be erased entirely from the map, replaced by a more prominent but perilous decoy route that steered all commerce toward a stronger, safer ally. This manipulation of perceived connectivity was a form of economic warfare waged on parchment. A rival trading guild pouring its capital and manpower into a route that led nowhere would slowly bleed resources and morale, its competitive edge dulled without a single sword being drawn. The invention of these phantom roads reveals a profound truth, that in the medieval world, controlling the perception of a trade network was often as valuable as controlling the network itself. It demonstrates how the hunger for commerce directly shaped the art of the lie, leading cartographers to construct entire fictional geographies of profit and loss. A saint's halo could hide the location of a rebel camp. This 15th method of cartographic deception weaponized the profound respect for religious iconography, embedding covert signals within sacred art. To the faithful, these symbols inspired devotion, but to a king or his agents, they were a clandestine briefing on troop loyalties, hidden fortifications, and simmering unrest. A map might show a serene illustration of the Virgin Mary with her hands clasped in prayer near a contested mountain range. To any casual observer, this was a simple testament to the region's piety. For the intended viewer, however, the precise angle of her gaze might point directly toward the entrance of a cave system used to shelter partisans. A large, ornate cross marking a town on the parchment could signify not a cathedral, but a garrison whose commander's loyalty to the crown was absolute. Conversely, a cross drawn with a subtly cracked shaft or a faded color could be a grave warning of a disloyal bishop or a city on the verge of open rebellion. This system relied on the moral authority of the church to provide a perfect shield. Who would dare to question the placement of a saint on a holy map? Scholars studying the dense symbolism of the Hereford Mappa Mundi have long noted that certain biblical scenes correspond curiously to historical political events. An image of David confronting Goliath, positioned near a border, might not just represent a Bible story, but could secretly commemorate a recent victory by a local duke over a much larger rival force, signaling his strength and reliability as an ally. The fusion of faith and strategy was seamless. A mapmaker could take a standard symbol like a church, and by adding one extra spire or a unique stained glass window in the drawing, transform its meaning entirely. That church was no longer a place of worship. It was a coded message indicating a safe house for spies or a storage depot for weapons. How did the religious context itself shape the interpretation of these codes? The answer lies in the shared cultural language of the medieval world. A depiction of Saint George, the warrior saint, slaying the dragon was a powerful allegory for good triumphing over evil. On a secret map, that very same scene, if placed near a rival lord's castle, could be the king's secret approval for a planned assault, using the saint's moral justification to sanctify a military operation. This practice allowed rulers to embed their most sensitive commands within imagery that felt divinely ordained, making the map not just a tool of war, but a document of holy purpose. It was a stark reminder that in these intricate deceptions, even the most sacred symbols could be recruited to guard a border. A river could be made to flow backward on parchment if it served a king's ambition. This 16th method of cartographic deception involved the deliberate manipulation of hydrological features, turning the lifeblood of the landscape into a tool for strategic misdirection. Water was the ultimate resource, dictating where armies could march, where cities could rise, and where trade could flourish. By subtly rerouting a river's course on a map, a cartographer could hide a vital, navigable waterway from a rival, or create the illusion of an impassable moat around a vulnerable plain. They might merge two separate rivers into a single, broad channel on the parchment, making a region appear isolated and difficult to supply. Or they could invent a network of non-existent tributaries to suggest a land was swampy and disease-ridden, discouraging settlement or invasion. The marshlands of Flanders provide a powerful historical example. Maps from that region often depicted the complex delta systems as far more extensive and treacherous than they were in reality. A narrow, easily navigated channel leading to a wealthy trading port might be drawn as a silt-choked dead end, while a maze of shallow, dangerous creeks was illustrated as a single, deep and inviting river. The goal was to mislead enemy navies, luring their ships into shallow waters where they would run aground, or steering them away from the true, protected approaches to the city. This hydrological trickery required a cartographer to be part geographer and part strategist. They needed enough genuine knowledge of how rivers behaved and how deltas formed to make their lies believable. A river shown flowing directly from a mountain range across a wide plain without any tributaries would be immediately suspect, but a river given a few plausible bends with a fictional wetland at its mouth could perfectly disguise the location of a secret ford used by local merchants. What was the most effective of these aqueous deceptions? The exaggeration of wetlands was particularly potent. By drawing a vast, impassable swamp where only a small marsh existed, a mapmaker could force an invading army to take a long, exhausting detour, draining their supplies and morale long before they ever reached the battlefield. This control over the perception of water allowed kingdoms to dictate movement and settlement without building a single wall, proving that the most fluid lines on a map could carve the most rigid borders in the minds of their enemies. A forest painted in the vibrant green of summer could secretly warn of a mountain pass choked with winter snow. This 17th method, the encoding of seasonal or temporal information, transformed static maps into dynamic calendars for war and trade. Mapmakers understood that a border was not a fixed line, but a living entity that changed with the seasons, and they learned to embed those changes directly into their pigments and symbols. By illustrating a woodland with the rich gold and red of autumn, a cartographer was not just displaying artistic skill, he was communicating that the river running through it was now at its lowest, making it easily fordable for cavalry. A field drawn with sheaves of wheat and farmers harvesting was not a quaint rural scene. It was a precise signal that the local garrisons would be understaffed, as soldiers were often sent home to help bring in the crops, creating a perfect window of vulnerability for a swift raid. Scholars like Naomi Miller have shown how these seasonal codes were often integrated directly into the medieval calendars that frequently decorated map borders, linking the passage of months directly to the shifting strategic value of the land. This practice provided a crucial, proactive advantage. An Allied commander did not have to send scouts to learn if a pass was clear. He could simply consult the map. If the forest near the border was shaded in the deep, full green of late spring, he knew the route was open, the ground was firm, and the campaign season had begun. How did these temporal codes remain reliable in the face of unpredictable weather? The system was built on long-term patterns, not daily forecasts. A mapmaker would encode the typical, historical condition for a given season. A river delta depicted with swollen, overflowing banks was a permanent warning of the spring thaw, regardless of whether a specific year was unusually dry. This encoded seasonality added a layer of profound practicality to cartographic espionage. It acknowledged that the greatest threat to an army was often not the enemy's soldiers, but the environment itself, the mud, the snow, the flooding rivers. By turning the map into a guide for when to move, not just where to move, cartographers gave their patrons the power to synchronize their strategies with the very turning of the earth, ensuring their maneuvers were as timely as they were tactical. The blank spaces on a map were not always a confession of ignorance. They could be a carefully cultivated weapon. This 18th method, the strategic use of empty spaces and so-called terra incognita, weaponized the very concept of the unknown. A vast white expanse labeled with the ominous phrase "Here be dragons" was rarely a sign that the cartographer had simply run out of information. More often, it was a deliberate act of psychological warfare, a calculated void designed to breed uncertainty and fear. These empty spaces were used to conceal territories that were, in fact, perfectly well known to the mapmaker and his patrons, creating a buffer of perceived danger that discouraged rivals from venturing into sensitive areas. A rival kingdom, seeing a blank swath of land on its border, might assume the region was barren or inhabited by monsters, when in reality it concealed a fertile valley or a rich vein of ore that the mapmaker's kingdom wished to exploit for itself. The famous Vinland map, for instance, shows a tantalizingly vague outline of a new world, its interior left almost entirely empty. This was not necessarily a lack of detail, but could have been a strategic choice to downplay the significance of the discovery to rivals, or to maintain a monopoly on the knowledge of these new routes and resources. This cartographic silence played directly on human psychology. A known danger, like a marked fortress, could be assessed and planned against, but the utter unknown was a different kind of threat, one that conjured up every possible fear of starvation, monsters, and getting hopelessly lost. By controlling the narrative of exploration, mapmakers could effectively steer colonial ambitions and settle border disputes without firing a single shot. A blank space on a map could be used to support a claim of terra nullius, or nobody's land, justifying expansion into a territory that was, in fact, already inhabited and governed. What truly motivated these cartographic silences? The reasons were as strategic as they were varied. Sometimes, an empty space protected a secret trade route to a distant ally. Other times, it hid the location of a rebellious province to prevent a rival from offering it support. The power of these empty spaces reveals a profound truth, that on the medieval map, absence was never neutral. It was an active, potent force that shaped the decisions of kings and the fates of empires, proving that sometimes the most powerful statement a cartographer could make was to say nothing at all. A ghost story told to children could mark the site of a royal garrison. This 19th method, the incorporation of folk tales and local lore as codes, turned community memory into a secret weapon for border defense. Mapmakers did not just listen to these stories, they weaponized them, weaving popular legends directly into their illustrations and annotations to create a cultural cipher that was utterly impenetrable to outsiders. Consider a map that included a small illustration of a spectral knight near a forest on the kingdom's edge. To any foreign agent, this was merely a superstitious local legend, a quaint piece of folklore to be ignored. But to a trusted ally from the region, that very same ghost story was a precise warning. The tale of the knight who forever guarded his treasure was a coded message that the forest concealed a well-hidden ambush site, or that a specific patrol route used by border guards passed directly through that glade. This system transformed the shared knowledge of a community into a living, breathing intelligence network, all without a single written order that could be intercepted. Experts studying itineraries like the Tabula Peutingeriana have observed how certain place names and symbols correspond not to geography, but to local myths, acting as mnemonic devices for travelers in the know. A valley labeled with a tale of a dragon's curse might genuinely be prone to deadly landslides, a danger known only to locals. Conversely, a story about a benevolent spirit who guided lost travelers could secretly point toward a hidden freshwater spring in a parched region. The beauty of this method was its flawless camouflage. An invading commander would dismiss warnings of a haunted mountain pass as peasant nonsense, only to have his supply wagons vanish without a trace, ambushed by partisans who knew the terrain intimately. How did these lore-based codes vary across regions? The system was incredibly adaptable, rooted in the unique fears and beliefs of each locality. In coastal villages, legends of shipwrecked ghosts and merfolk were used to mark treacherous underwater reefs or secret smuggling coves. In mountainous areas, tales of giants throwing boulders might signify avalanche-prone slopes or the locations of strategic rockfall traps that could be triggered on defending armies. This practice highlights the profound role of culture in cartographic deception, proving that a kingdom's greatest strategic asset was sometimes not its army but its stories. It ensured that the most vital secrets of the border were protected not by locks and keys, but by the enduring power of a well-told tale. A border line could be thickened with a stroke of the brush to project an illusion of unshakable control. This 20th method, the distortion of political boundaries through allegiance symbols, turned the very lines between kingdoms into a fluid language of loyalty and deceit. Medieval mapmakers were not merely drawing borders, they were illustrating the delicate, ever-shifting web of feudal oaths and secret pacts, often depicting a ruler's ambitious claims rather than the messy reality on the ground. A thick, unbroken line of deep crimson might separate two rival duchies, presenting a facade of impregnable sovereignty. Yet that same border, if rendered as a faint, dashed line in a trusted ally's copy of the map, could secretly signal a region ripe for infiltration or a local lord whose allegiance was wavering and could be persuaded to switch sides. This visual coding of political relationships required mapmakers to act as intelligence analysts, constantly updating their parchment with the latest diplomatic gossip and military dispatches. During the protracted chaos of the Wars of the Roses, maps were swiftly altered to show Yorkist or Lancastrian control over territories that were, in truth, fiercely contested. A castle town might be encircled with the victor's colors long before their army actually arrived, a powerful piece of propaganda designed to demoralize the opposition and convince neutral parties to join the winning side. What symbols were most commonly used to represent these fragile allegiances? Heraldic patterns were a primary tool. A borderland filled with a repeated fleur-de-lis pattern, even if it technically belonged to another crown, was a bold cartographic claim of influence or desired ownership. Conversely, a region splattered with the emblems of a rival house, even if inaccurate, could be used in negotiations to justify an invasion, portraying the area as a natural extension of the enemy's domain that needed to be reclaimed. The most subtle codes involved the texture of the line itself. A border drawn with a series of tiny crosses might indicate a region under the protection of the church, suggesting it was neutral ground, while a border composed of interlocking rings could denote a marriage alliance, a silent promise of mutual defense. This practice reveals the map as a living document of ambition, where political reality was not recorded, but actively sculpted in ink. A cartographer's line was never just a boundary. It was a statement of intent, a threat, or a promise, constantly redrawn in the silent, parchment-based war for perceived power. A village named Ardent could secretly spell danger for anyone who knew how to read it. This 21st method, the use of cryptographic techniques in labels and annotations, transformed ordinary place names into locked boxes of strategic intelligence. Mapmakers, often trained in monastic scriptoria where secret writing was a prized skill, employed substitution ciphers, acrostics, and clever anagrams to encode everything from the number of soldiers in a garrison to the precise coordinates of a hidden cache. The written word on the map, which seemed so transparent, became a sophisticated puzzle, its true meaning accessible only to a select few who held the key. A town innocently labeled Corbenic, for instance, might be an anagram for Berenic, a coded reference to a nearby port known only to trusted naval commanders. A river named Flumen Itotes, or River of Age, could use the first letters of its name in a substitution cipher where each letter corresponded to a number, secretly revealing the distance to the next freshwater spring. Scholars like Klaus Bayer have painstakingly decoded these techniques in surviving Portolan charts, revealing how cartography and early cryptology were deeply intertwined disciplines. This wasn't about hiding the information from view, but about displaying it openly in a form that was useless to adversaries. A rival spy could stare at the map for hours, copying every name and description, and never realize that the seemingly random sequence of letters in a border annotation spelled out the phrase "low supplies" when read backwards. How were these intricate ciphers developed and safely distributed among allies? The system relied on pre-arranged codebooks or simple cipher wheels that could be easily concealed. A courtier traveling to a distant ally might carry nothing more incriminating than a piece of poetry, yet the first letter of each line could provide the key to deciphering the map's labels upon his arrival. This method allowed for an astonishing density of information to be stored in plain text, turning the entire document into a clandestine report that could be passed under the very noses of enemies. The integration of cryptography represents a high point in cartographic sophistication, where the mapmaker's quill was as precise as a spy's cipher key, proving that the most powerful borders were not drawn with lines but with letters. A map could lie simply by choosing where to stand. This 20-second method, the manipulation of perspective and viewpoint, allowed cartographers to control the narrative before a single geographical line was even drawn. By rendering the land from a specific, elevated angle, they could exaggerate some features into terrifying obstacles while causing others to vanish completely from sight. A coastline might be illustrated from a steep, oblique perspective that transformed gentle, sandy beaches into sheer, insurmountable cliffs, making a naval landing appear utterly impossible. The only safe harbor, a secret cove used by the kingdom's own ships, would be the one place shown from a flatter, more accessible angle, a visual cue invisible to anyone without the key. This was not a crude distortion of scale, but a sophisticated control of the viewer's gaze, using the very language of art to dictate strategic reality. Historical manuscripts like the Book of Curiosities are filled with such perspectival tricks, where the chosen viewpoint deliberately warps spatial relationships to serve a hidden agenda. A mountain pass crucial for trade could be drawn from behind a towering, foreground ridge, making the route appear blocked and unnavigable. Conversely, a vulnerable plain might be depicted from a high bird's-eye view that minimized the height of its defensive walls, making it look like an easy and inviting target for an invader. The technique demanded immense artistic skill. The mapmaker had to blend realism with manipulation so seamlessly that the deception felt like an authentic representation of the world. A city shown from a low angle with its walls looming dramatically overhead was not just an artistic choice, it was a psychological one, designed to impress upon any rival the city's formidable strength. How did cultural preferences in art influence these perspectival tricks? In regions where religious iconography favored hierarchical scale, with more important figures drawn larger, this principle easily transferred to maps. A king's favorite city might be depicted disproportionately large and in the foreground, while a rival's holdings were shrunk and pushed to the distant, indistinct background. This subjective angle of view fundamentally challenges the idea of a neutral cartographic truth. It proves that every map is not just a depiction of a place, but a story told from a specific point of view, a story that could be carefully edited to defend a border, promote an alliance, or conceal a weakness from all who lack the privilege to see the land from the ruler's own eyes. A specific bird perched on a map's border could signal the presence of hidden scouts. This 23rd method transformed the rich illustrations of flora and fauna into a precise symbolic language for resources, dangers, and secret communications. The natural world depicted on these parchments was rarely just a celebration of creation. It was a covert field guide where every plant and animal held a second, strategic meaning. A wolf drawn prowling near a forest edge was not merely a fearsome predator. It was a universally understood code for bandit activity or a region under loose control, warning travelers and armies alike to steer clear. Conversely, a sturdy oak tree, a symbol of strength and endurance, often marked a pre-arranged meeting point for messengers or a safe campsite with a reliable freshwater spring nearby. Mapmakers relied on biologically accurate details to make these codes believable and functional. They would consult with local hunters and herbalists to ensure the species they drew were indigenous to the area, layering their deception with a foundation of truth. An expert studying a TO map would see a rendering of the known world, but within that spiritual framework, the specific type of grapevine illustrated near a river might secretly indicate the presence of a friendly village known for its wine, a vital resupply point for agents on the move. How were these biological codes standardized across vastly different ecosystems? The system was both local and universal. While a wolf might generally mean danger everywhere, a more specific creature, like a particular species of hawk, could have a unique meaning in one kingdom, signaling the location of a lookout post, while in another region, a cluster of cedar trees might denote a hidden cache of weapons. This practice highlights the profound interconnection between environment and espionage. The mapmaker had to be a master naturalist, using the land's own inhabitants to guard its secrets. A field of lavender, beautiful to the eye, could be a warning of marshy, unstable ground, while a drawing of a bear emerging from a cave might point to a secluded mountain pass used for moving troops unseen. This biological coding made the map a dynamic tool for survival, where understanding the local wildlife was as crucial as reading a compass, seamlessly blending the art of navigation with the ancient wisdom of the earth itself. One single map could tell two completely different stories. The 24th method of cartographic deception involved the deliberate creation of dual-purpose maps, each version tailored to mislead a specific audience while guiding another. A beautifully rendered map presented to a foreign diplomat might show exaggerated defenses along a shared border, a clear warning against aggression. That very same document, when given to a trusted general, would come with a small, separate key or a set of verbal instructions that corrected the deliberate errors, revealing the true, vulnerable state of those same defenses. This was not a matter of different maps for different purposes, but a single artifact designed to be interpreted in two opposing ways, its truth locked away from those not granted the key. Historical records from the diplomatic courts of Renaissance Italy are filled with accounts of maps being used in precisely this way. A city-state might provide a visiting ambassador with a map that subtly shifted a river border in their own favor, hoping to establish the new boundary as a diplomatic fact during negotiations. Meanwhile, their own military commanders operated from a corrected version, ensuring their patrols and fortifications were placed according to the real geography. The logistical challenge of producing these dual narratives was immense. A mapmaker had to plan the deception from the very first stroke of the quill, carefully introducing errors that were plausible enough to avoid suspicion yet significant enough to mislead. He had to ensure that the internal, corrected version remained perfectly synchronized with reality, a task that required meticulous record-keeping and discreet communication with scouts and surveyors. The entire system relied on controlling the flow of information with absolute precision. A single misplaced copy of the true map or a careless word from a courtier could unravel the entire scheme and expose the kingdom's strategic deceptions. This practice of audience-specific mapping represents the peak of cartographic social engineering. It was no longer enough to hide a code within the map itself became a test of allegiance. By controlling access to truth, cartographers turned geography into a gatekeeper, separating insider from outsider, friend from foe, with nothing more than a few carefully placed lines on a sheet of parchment. A bell tower drawn on a map was rarely just a place of worship. It could be a secret node in a kingdom's early warning system, representing the 25th method of cartographic deception, the use of sound-based or auditory codes. While maps are fundamentally visual, medieval cartographers cleverly incorporated symbols for bells, horns, and drums to embed dynamic communication strategies directly into the static parchment. A simple illustration of a church bell near a coastal village did not merely mark the town's location. For a military commander reading the map, that bell was a precise symbol indicating that the village served as a lookout post, its pealing bells used to signal the approach of enemy ships long before they could be seen. Similarly, a horn symbol sketched near a mountain pass might not point to a hunter's camp, but to a rallying point where specific bugle calls would coordinate the movements of scattered border patrols. Scholars like Michael Camille have highlighted how medieval art, including maps, often hinted at these multisensory elements, acknowledging that a border was not just a line to be seen, but a space to be heard. This auditory coding transformed the map from a simple guide into a living manual for real-time response. How did these sound signals integrate with local customs? The system was deeply rooted in the everyday life of the community. In regions where church bells normally tolled for prayers, a special, frantic rhythm could be the pre-arranged signal for an imminent attack, a warning that would be instantly understood by locals but meaningless to an invading force unfamiliar with the local cadence. In forested territories where sightlines were short, the map might mark a clearing with a drum symbol, indicating a place where coded percussion beats could relay messages about troop numbers or directions over long distances. This holistic approach to border defense acknowledged that the most effective secrets were those woven into the fabric of daily existence. The sound of a shepherd's horn echoing through a valley might be a genuine part of his work, but on certain days, that same sound could be a disguised command, directing partisans to block a narrow trail. By encoding these auditory plans, mapmakers ensured that a kingdom's defenses were not locked in parchment alone, but lived in the very air, waiting for the right moment to sound an alarm that only friends could understand. A single gilded coin painted on a map could bankrupt a rival trading guild. This 26th method, the integration of economic data as misleading indicators, turned the parchment into a battlefield for commercial warfare. Cartographers learned that the most effective way to cripple an adversary was not always to confront their armies, but to sabotage their purse. They expertly manipulated the symbols of trade, agriculture, and mining, creating entire fictional economies designed to lure competitors into costly and feudal ventures. A barren, windswept coastline might be adorned with elaborate illustrations of gold mines and bustling spice markets, suggesting untold riches. The goal was to entice a rival kingdom to pour its capital and colonists into this decoy region, draining their treasury while the mapmakers' own nation continued to exploit the real sources of wealth in secret. Historical maps from the powerful Hanseatic League provide clear evidence of this practice. Competing merchant cities would produce charts that deliberately exaggerated the prosperity of certain ports while completely omitting others, all in an effort to redirect shipping traffic and disrupt the carefully balanced networks of their commercial enemies. This form of deception required a mapmaker to possess a deep understanding of what drove trade. He had to know which commodities, whether amber, wool, or silver, would be irresistible to a particular rival. A false symbol for a silver mine had to be placed in a geologically plausible area near mountains or old riverbeds, or the lie would be too easily uncovered. Which economic factors were most frequently targeted? Agricultural wealth was a prime candidate. A rival's fertile plains, vital for feeding their population, could be depicted with symbols for salted earth or blighted crops, making the land seem worthless and discouraging investment or even inciting famine fears. Conversely, a strategically important but economically poor border region might be filled with drawings of fat livestock and overflowing grain silos, presenting itself as a tempting prize that would lure an invading army into a logistical nightmare far from their supply lines. This manipulation of economic geography was a cold, calculated form of conflict avoidance. By making a rival waste their resources chasing cartographic mirages, a kingdom could weaken them financially, ensuring that when and if war came, their enemy would already be exhausted. It proved that on the medieval map, a symbol of wealth was never just a promise of profit. It was often the most elegant and silent weapon of all. A map was never just a map. It was a declaration, a shield, and sometimes a beautifully crafted lie. Our journey through the clandestine world of medieval mapmaking reveals that these artifacts were far more than navigational aids. They were sophisticated instruments of strategy and deception, where every stroke of the quill served a hidden purpose. From the deliberate distortion of mountains and rivers to the secret ciphers woven into ornate borders, mapmakers wielded immense creativity and deep knowledge. Their goal was singular: to protect their kingdoms and mislead their rivals by controlling the most precious resource of all, information. Reflecting on these 26 ingenious methods, a profound truth emerges. The struggle to control perception, to shape reality through the manipulation of data, is not a modern invention. It has always been a cornerstone of power. The phantom cities and coded sea monsters of the medieval world find their echoes today in digital deepfakes and algorithmic misinformation. The tools have changed, but the fundamental game remains the same. Let this exploration be a reminder to look closer at the maps and media you encounter. Question the stories they tell and consider the silent hands that may have drawn their lines. History's greatest secrets are not always hidden in vaults. Sometimes they are hidden in plain sight, waiting on a piece of parchment for a curious eye to finally see them. If you enjoyed uncovering these historical secrets, subscribe for more deep dives into the hidden histories that shape our world. We would love to hear which of these 27 deception methods fascinated you most. Share your thoughts in the comments below. Together, we can keep unraveling the past's enduring